Good morning, everybody. Ambassador Kosh coming at you with another work video. I'm going to talk to y'all just briefly about a couple of things that have been popping up online since this past weekend, and this will kind of feed into my 1980s pop culture video series I'm working on that y'all are watching or anything on my channel. As most people know by now, Charlie's Angels has bombed, and bombed badly. And there's been a number of other movies, in particular, going back a couple of years, Ghostbusters 2016 has bombed. Obviously, Terminator Dark Fate has bombed. And, well, let's just be candid here. There's been a lot of movies over the last several years that have bombed and bombed badly, or have had a very negative fan or just general audience response. And where I'm going with this is something that I think that some people have forgotten, particularly in Hollywood and just in general in society. In the 1980s, we had good movies, and obviously there were bad movies. And the difference between the 1980s and even going into the 1990s and the early 2000s and now is this narrative that's being pushed. Whenever a movie bombs or underperforms or does badly or has a negative message to it, it's a particular group of people's fault for the movie bombing or tanking or just not being well received. Trying to go back and sneeze. Don't want to blow your ears out. But something that happened within the 1980s, you would have movies that would underperform. Some of the movies I've covered thus far, in the instance of Tron, it underperformed. It didn't make all the money that Disney hoped would have. You've got Goonies, that I think did relatively well, but it wasn't a big box office smash or anything. This was a movie that was done by Steven Spielberg. You've got Crawl, that it did okay, but it wasn't some big smash hit. And there's a whole list of movies or anything from the 1980s or anything that didn't do particularly well at the box office, but they grew what we call a cult following afterward. And the thing you didn't see in the 1980s was all these actors and directors coming out and attacking the public because their movie didn't do well. Generally, the directors, they took it on the chin and they moved on because they had their next project coming up. They had their next movie to act in. They had their next script to write or what have you. And you didn't have all this divisiveness and negativity towards the public that came out and supported these movies. People were willing to give movies a chance. And whether it was good or bad, you walked out, that wasn't all that good, or that was actually pretty good, or wow, that blew my mind, that was so good. But you didn't have all this negativity pushed onto the public and everything because a movie didn't do particularly well at the box office because of some perceived slight. And I think that's very, very, very telling of the culture and the pop culture from the 1980s, is that people were willing to give movies a chance, and studios either made money or they didn't. Now, obviously, every movie studio, every major or minor movie studio that existed in the 1980s or still exists now, wanted to make money. They wanted to make a profit, and that's obvious. And the one thing these studios and these actors and directors and screenwriters did not do is come out and point their finger at the public and say, how dare you not go see our movie? You must be some ist or phobe or something along those lines. Generally, directors, actors, and what have you, they kept their mouth shut. They're like, Yeah, I made my money. Who cares? I got my check. I'm gonna go on and do my next thing. And let's be candid. There were some big name directors back in the day that they did some turkeys. They did some bad movies, or they did movies that didn't necessarily perform as well as everybody had hoped, or they hoped it would. But you didn't have all this negative pushback against the public, calling everybody everything under the sun. They called them an ist or a phobe, or they said they were a man baby, or what have you, or you didn't understand the movie. Now, there is one instance, and this actually is a movie that took place before the 1980s, and it's a relatively well-known one, and that's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was a movie done by Stanley Kubrick. And his list of movies, it's long, and most of them have been very well received. But something that he said, and the writer of the book that the movie's based on, Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001 and wrote 2010 and so on, something that they said and everything in the aftermath of 2001 is, yes, we want to present questions to the viewing audience. And if you didn't get all those questions, that's okay. If you weren't able to figure out what we were trying to say, that's okay, because even we didn't. We wanted to present more questions than we wanted to answers. It wasn't so much this idea of subverting expectations, because the movie 2001, it's deep. It's a very deep movie. It's a very philosophical movie. It's one that forces you to think and everything. But you didn't have Stanley Kubrick or Arthur C. Clarke coming out and attacking the public because people gave negative criticism of the movie because it was too slow, there wasn't very much story, or what have you. They said, this is the movie we made. If you get what we were trying to say in the movie, okay. If you didn't, okay. And they moved on. But you didn't have this constant haranguing on the public like you'd have in the last several years, in particular with one franchise that everybody knows, Star Wars. Now, you've got within the Star Wars, the sequel trilogy, you've got a microcosm of all that's actually very wrong in Hollywood and the relations between the film, the cinema industry and the general public, and in particular, the people that are fans of this franchise. And I'm going to do another video on a different aspect of this, in particular, this narrative that Rian Johnson specifically, and I think others have kind of latched onto, that Empire Strikes Back wasn't that well received of a movie at the time. And I'm not going to go into it here because obviously I want to discuss it in full elsewhere. But Rian Johnson has made a concerted effort to denigrate and talk down to and just be downright mean-spirited and everything towards the general public and the fandom of Star Wars. And if he was a director of any real talent or weight, he would have taken the criticism on the chin. He would have said, okay, obviously I did something wrong here. How can I make it right? And I think instead of him taking to Twitter, or if he even is on Facebook or what have you, or doing these interviews where he shoots all these barbs at the Star Wars fandom and just the general public and everything, saying, well, y'all are just a bunch of toxic man babies, and y'all don't get my movie, or you're not smart enough to get my movie, and what have you. If you just take it on the chin like a better director, say, oh, I don't know, Steven Spielberg, who's, by and large, Steven Spielberg has done good movies. He's done quality movies, but he will admit himself, he's done some stinkers. Or another one, Ridley Scott. I think we pretty well know Ridley Scott's reputation in Hollywood. He's done good movies and he's done bad ones. That's just a given. But you don't see Ridley Scott coming out and attacking the general audience and calling them all these names and what have you. And I'll be the first to admit it. I was very critical, and I've kind of talked about this in passing above The Last Jedi. I was very vocal about it. I did not like it. But I have a thick enough skin that Rian Johnson saying some things in my general direction, I'm not going to particularly care. Because I grew up in an era where you just let that crap just slide off your back. Now, I'm not saying those people who are diehard fans of Star Wars, which I am a part of, shouldn't be offended. But here's the thing. In a few years, Rian Johnson is going to fade into obscurity. This is just my own personal opinion. He's not going to be around much longer. Or anything. Because his reputation in Hollywood is going to be tarnished. It's going to be tainted because of Last Jedi. And I would probably say his next upcoming movie, I think it comes out next week, Knives Out. And kind of transitioning here, this is another thing that you did not see in the 80s and the 90s when it came to cinema. You did not see these movies that were blatantly created to be a punchback at the general audience or society and what have you. And Rian Johnson has made no bones that Knives Out is a slap in the face of the patriarchy or of toxic white males or whatever you want to call it. And I'm sorry, there may be a very small segment of the general public that might find that interesting or intriguing, but by and large, a lot of people, when they hear the name Rian Johnson, even if they are not a Star Wars fan, they're going to know what he has done in all these interviews post The Last Jedi, or what he has said on Twitter towards the fan base. And they're going to say, why would I want to go support this guy's movie? I certainly don't. Even if I was a person that had no knowledge of what he has said or done. Okay, let me rephrase this. If I was someone that wasn't a Star Wars fan, but I heard what he had said about people's response and reaction to The Last Jedi, I would say, I think I'm going to skip this one. And that'd be perfectly okay. So, just to kind of wrap this up. The era of the 1980s gave us some great movies. And it gave us some movies that weren't particularly very profitable at the time, but have grown a cult following. But the one thing and I think the reason they did grow a cult following over time is that the actors and the directors and those that did the screenplays, they knew well enough to keep their mouths shut. And people will go back and they'll rewatch these movies, or they'll have friends of theirs introduce them to this movie. You've never seen The Thing, you've never seen Goonies, you've never seen X, Y, or Z. You need to watch this because this is a great movie. And over time, these movies have gotten to a point where they're appreciated, where they're loved, and where people hold a special place in their heart for them. And I think the fact that you see that happened in the 80s, but now you have these actors and these directors and everybody else under the sun coming out and attacking the general audience and saying, oh, you didn't like my movie, how dare you, you must be this or that or the other. People are going to go, well, I'm just going to forget all about this movie, because here's the thing about nostalgia. Nostalgia is generally a very positive emotion, a very positive feeling or state of mind. And you want to revisit something that made you feel good. You generally don't want to revisit something that makes you feel bad. And I would say a lot of the movies that have come out in the 2010s like from 2010 up until this year, 2019, a lot of people are going to look at these movies that have come out and say, I don't know if I'm going to watch this 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road again, or if I'm going to want to buy a copy of it if it ever is re-released or what have you on whatever medium comes down the road after Blu-ray or whatever, or 4K. But you're going to have these 4K releases of movies from back in the day, or the 80s or the 90s or what have you, and people are going to be like, ooh, they're re-releasing this movie in 4K or whatever it is. I want to go buy it. And that's why these movies will endure. This is why these movies will last. And there'll be something that can be passed on to the next generation. So, yeah. That's my 2 cents on this. I hope this made some sort of sense. I know it's early for me. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning and everything. Like I said, I'm just taking a break, do another work video for y'all. And if y'all are enjoying these, as always, like, give thumbs, smash that, as I say on some of the other channels, smash that melee button, give it a thumbs up, comment below with your own thoughts, subscribe to my channel. I'm almost at 50 subscribers, and just a few days ago I was almost at 40, so I must be doing something right, and I appreciate you all for watching. So, yeah, as I just said, do all the things I just listed, like, share, subscribe, and most definitely share everything, because the more these videos get reshared, people are going to be attracted to my channel and everything, and hopefully I'm providing something that y'all are enjoying. So until next time, my fellow nerdologists, this is Ambassador Kosh saying, I've always been here. Talk to y'all later.